The words still echoed in Emma's mind 3 months later, sharp and cutting like broken glass. "You'll never find love again. No man would ever want someone like you." Her ex-husband, Derek, had spat those words at her during their final argument, his face twisted with cruelty as he packed his belongings. But what hurt most wasn't just the venom in his voice. It was how he'd pointed toward the coffee shop across the street, where a tall, distinguished man in a perfectly tailored suit was reading by the window. "See that guy? That's the kind of man you think you deserve, but men like him are completely out of your league. You're delusional if you think you could ever attract someone of his caliber." "Hi there, I'm Tina, and today I'm bringing you a story that will absolutely blow your mind. It's about Emma, a woman whose ex-husband tried to destroy her self-worth with the cruelest words imaginable. But what happened next? Well, let's just say the universe has a beautiful way of proving toxic people wrong. You're going to witness an incredible journey of transformation, unexpected romance, and the most satisfying twist of fate you've ever heard. Trust me, you need to stay until the very end, because the conclusion will leave you speechless and restore your faith in love and justice. Before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything to me. Now let's continue with Emma's remarkable story. Emma had spent 2 years married to Derek. 2 years of walking on eggshells and shrinking herself to fit into his narrow vision of who she should be. He criticized everything: her appearance, her dreams of returning to college, her close relationship with her sister Maya. "You're too dependent," he'd say one day, then complain she was too independent the next when she tried to make decisions for herself. The contradictions were exhausting, designed to keep her confused and compliant. Derek worked as a middle management supervisor at a logistics company, and he lorded his steady paycheck over her like a weapon. "Without me, you'd be nothing," became his favorite phrase, usually delivered with a smirk that made her stomach turn. Emma had been working part-time at a local bookstore, saving every penny she could in a secret account, dreaming of the day she'd have enough courage to leave. The final fight had erupted over something trivial. Emma had bought organic groceries without asking Derek first. "Do you think we're made of money?" he'd screamed, his face red with rage. "You make minimum wage at that pathetic little bookstore, and you're out here spending like we're millionaires. You have no concept of reality, no understanding of how the real world works." Emma had quietly tried to explain that the organic vegetables were only $3 more than regular ones, but Derek was already spiraling into one of his cruel rants. "This is exactly why you'll never amount to anything," he'd continued, pacing around their gichoim, small apartment like a caged animal. "You live in this fantasy world where everything is handed to you. Well, let me tell you something. When I leave, and I am leaving, you're going to crash back down to earth real fast." That's when he delivered those devastating final words, pointing across the street with malicious glee. The man in the coffee shop, tall, impeccably dressed, absorbed in what looked like important business documents, became Derek's weapon of choice. "Look at him," Derek had sneered. "Probably a lawyer or a doctor, someone successful, someone with real substance. That's the kind of man you fantasize about, isn't it? But here's reality. Men like that don't date women like you. You're a dreamer, Emma, and dreamers end up alone." The cruelty in his voice had been breathtaking, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "You'll come crawling back to me within a month, begging me to take you back. And maybe I will, if you learn to be grateful for what you have instead of always wanting more." Emma had stood frozen in their kitchen, Derek's suitcase by the door, feeling like her entire world was crumbling around her. Part of her wanted to scream back, to tell him exactly what she thought of his emotional abuse and constant belittlement. But another part, the part that had been systematically worn down over 2 years, wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe she was delusional. Maybe she was reaching for something beyond her grasp. As Derek slammed the door behind him, Emma sank into the chair by her window, the same window that offered a perfect view of the coffee shop across the street. Through her tears, she could still see the mysterious man Derek had used as ammunition against her self-worth, peacefully reading his book, completely unaware that he'd become a symbol of everything she supposedly couldn't have. The apartment felt impossibly quiet after Derek left. Emma sat in that chair for hours, watching the man across the street. He seemed so calm, so centered, occasionally sipping his coffee or making notes in the margins of whatever he was reading. There was something almost meditative about his presence, a stark contrast to the chaos Derek always brought into every room. As evening approached, the man gathered his things and left, but Emma remained by the window, Derek's words playing on repeat in her mind. "You'll never find love again." The worst part was how a small voice inside her head whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The next morning, Emma woke up in her empty apartment with swollen eyes and a heart that felt like it had been put through a shredder. Derek's words continued to echo, but in the harsh light of day, something else began to emerge. Anger. Not just at Derek, but at herself for allowing someone to speak to her that way for so long. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. When had she started seeing herself through Derek's critical lens? When had she begun to believe that she was somehow less worthy of love and respect than other people? Emma had always been drawn to books, finding solace in stories of strong characters who overcame impossible odds. Working at Riverside Books wasn't just a job for her, it was a sanctuary. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, had become like a grandmother to her, often leaving little notes of encouragement tucked between the pages of books she knew Emma would shelve. "You have such a bright spirit, dear," she'd written just last week. "Don't let anyone dim your light." At the time, Emma had smiled and tucked the note away, but now those words felt prophetic. That Tuesday morning, as Emma arranged the new fiction display, she noticed the coffee shop across the street was buzzing with its usual morning crowd. And there he was again, the man Derek had pointed to with such contempt. Today he wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his fingers through it while reading. Emma found herself studying him with new interest. What was it about him that had triggered Derek's insecurity so viscerally? Was it his obvious success, evident in his expensive clothes and confident posture? Or was it something deeper, the way he seemed completely comfortable in his own skin, something Derek had never mastered despite all his bravado? "You're staring again," came a gentle voice behind her. Emma spun around to find Mrs. Patterson watching her with knowing eyes and an amused smile. "That's Dr. James Sullivan," she continued, moving to stand beside Emma at the window. "He's a cardiologist at Presbyterian Hospital. Comes in here every few months to buy medical journals and sometimes fiction. Quiet man, very kind. Always asks about local authors and donates books to the children's ward at the hospital." Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I wasn't staring," she protested weakly. But Mrs. Patterson just chuckled. "Honey, I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone seeing possibility where there used to be only walls." The older woman's words were gentle but penetrating. Your ex-husband, did a number on your confidence, didn't he? But let me tell you something about worthy men, dear. They don't measure a woman's value by her bank account or her job title. They look for kindness, intelligence, authenticity, qualities you have in abundance. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Sullivan chose that moment to cross the street and enter the bookstore. Emma's heart hammered as the bell above the door chimed his arrival. Up close, he was even more striking than she'd imagined. He had warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and when he smiled at Mrs. Patterson, his whole face transformed with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. I hope you're well." His voice was deep and smooth, with just a hint of a southern accent that made Emma's knees feel slightly unsteady. "Dr. Sullivan," Mrs. Patterson beamed. "How wonderful to see you. We just got in that new collection of contemporary medical case studies you ordered, and Emma here has been keeping them safe in the back room." Emma wanted to disappear into the floor as Mrs. Patterson smoothly maneuvered her into the conversation. "Emma is our literary expert. She knows more about books than anyone I've ever met. She's been hand-selecting medical journals based on the most current research." Dr. Sullivan turned those warm brown eyes toward Emma, and she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nervousness. "That's incredibly thoughtful," he said, extending his hand toward her. "I'm James." His handshake was firm but gentle, his attention completely focused on her in a way that made her feel like the most interesting person in the room. Derek had never looked at her like that, like she was worthy of his full attention, like her thoughts and opinions actually mattered. Listen, I need to pause here for just a moment because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I promise you it's true. Sometimes the universe works in the most mysterious ways, bringing exactly the right people together at exactly the right moment. But before we continue with Emma and James's incredible story, I want you to know that you're part of something special here. We're not just telling stories, we're building a community of people who believe in second chances, in the power of love to heal old wounds, and in the beautiful truth that we're all deserving of happiness. If this story is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because I guarantee you know someone who does. Now let's continue with what happens next, because you won't believe the conversation Emma and James are about to have. I have to confess. Something, James said, as Emma led him toward the back room where his medical journals waited. I've seen you working here many times, and I've always wanted to say hello, but I didn't want to interrupt your work. You always look so focused and passionate when you're organizing books or helping customers. It's refreshing to see someone who truly loves what they do. Emma felt her heart skip as she unlocked the storage room door. Derek had never noticed her passion for anything, let alone complimented her work ethic. In fact, he'd often complained that she cared more about those dusty old books than she did about their relationship. As Emma retrieved the carefully wrapped medical journals, James wandered around the small space, examining the rare books and special collections stored there. "This is remarkable," he murmured, running his fingers along the spine of a first-edition novel. "You've organized this entire collection by both chronological and thematic significance. Are you a librarian by training?" The question was asked with such genuine curiosity that Emma found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. "Actually, I studied literature in college before," she trailed off, not wanting to mention Derek or the way he'd convinced her that her education was worthless, that she should be grateful for any job at all. "Before what?" James asked gently, sensing there was more to the story. Something in his tone, patient, non-judgmental, made Emma feel safe, enough to continue. "Before I got married, and my husband convinced me that my dreams were impractical. He said I was living in a fantasy world, that I needed to focus on reality instead of books and stories." The words came out in a rush, followed immediately by embarrassment. Why was she sharing such personal information with this stranger? But James didn't look uncomfortable or eager to change the subject. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe and gave her his full attention. "Your ex-husband," he said carefully, "sounds like he was threatened by your intelligence and passion. In my experience, people who try to diminish others' dreams are usually deeply insecure about their own limitations." Emma stared at him, stunned. In one sentence, this man had seen through Derek's behavior in a way that had taken her years to recognize. "May I ask you something that might seem forward?" James continued, his brown eyes serious behind his glasses. "When you were studying literature, what did you dream of doing with that knowledge?" Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as she remembered the young woman she used to be, confident, ambitious, full of plans and possibilities. "I wanted to be an editor," she whispered. "Maybe work for a publishing house or start a literary magazine. I had so many ideas about connecting readers with stories that would change their lives." James smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "That's not a fantasy, Emma. That's a calling. And from what I can see in how you've organized this collection, how you interact with customers, how Mrs. Patterson talks about you, you have the skills and passion to make that dream reality." Emma felt something crack open in her chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten. Hope. "But I don't have the connections, the experience, the confidence," James finished gently. "Because someone spent years telling you that your dreams weren't valid?" Emma nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. "Emma, I see people every day whose hearts are broken, literally broken. And do you know what the ones who recover have in common? They refuse to let other people's limitations become their own. They fight for their dreams, even when everyone around them says, It's impossible. As they talked, Emma found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone in years. Her love of discovering new authors, her idea for a book club that would connect isolated community members, her dream of someday writing her own novel. James listened to every word with the kind of attention that made her feel heard and valued. He asked thoughtful questions, offered encouraging observations, and never once suggested that her dreams were too big or impractical. "I have a confession to make," James said, as they walked back toward the front of the store, his medical journals tucked under his arm. "I'm not just a cardiologist. I'm also on the board of the city's literary foundation. We're always looking for passionate, knowledgeable people to help us with our programs, book festivals, literacy initiatives, connecting authors with readers. Would you be interested in volunteering? It might be a good way to start rebuilding those connections you mentioned." Emma felt like she was floating. After years of Derek telling her she had nothing valuable to offer, here was this successful, kind man suggesting she had skills worth sharing with the community. "I would love that," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "But James, I have to ask, why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." James paused at the front door, his hand on the handle, and turned back to face her. "Because," he said simply, "I believe in recognizing potential when I see it. And Emma, you have more potential than you realize. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As he walked back across the street to the coffee shop, Emma watched him go with a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change in ways she'd never dared imagine. That evening, Emma called her sister Maya for the first time in months. Derek had always found excuses to cut their conversations short or create conflicts that made it difficult for Emma to maintain close relationships. "Maya," she said when her sister answered, "I think I'm ready to remember who I used to be." Maya's reaction was everything Emma had hoped for, and more. "Emma, oh my God. I've been waiting for this call for 2 years," her sister exclaimed through tears of joy. "I've missed you so much, but I didn't want to push because I knew you had to find your way back to yourself in your own time." They talked for 3 hours that night, with Maya filling Emma in on family news, career updates, and all the little details of life that Derek had made Emma feel guilty for caring about. "He isolated you," Maya said bluntly toward the end of their conversation. "Classic emotional abuse tactic. Make you feel like your family and friends don't really care about you, that he's the only one who truly understands you. I'm so proud of you for leaving him." The next few weeks passed in a blur of rediscovery. Emma threw herself into volunteering with the Literary Foundation, and James had been right. She was a natural fit. Her first project was helping organize a community reading program for seniors in assisted living facilities. "Your idea to pair classic novels with contemporary stories that share similar themes is brilliant," said Margaret Torres, the foundation's director. "You have an intuitive understanding of how literature can create connections across generations." Emma found herself working closely with James on several projects, and each interaction revealed new layers of his character. He wasn't just successful and kind, he was thoughtful in ways that constantly surprised her. When she mentioned that many of the seniors in the reading program felt invisible and forgotten, James arranged for medical students from the hospital to volunteer as reading companions, creating intergenerational friendships that enriched both groups. When Emma worried that some community members couldn't afford books for the monthly book club discussions, James quietly established a fund to provide free copies, asking only that recipients pass their books along to others when finished. "You're remarkable," Emma told him one evening as they organized books for an upcoming literacy fair. They were working in the community center after hours, surrounded by boxes of donated books that needed to be sorted and cataloged. James looked up from the stack of children's books he was examining, his hair slightly messy from running his fingers through it, a habit Emma had come to find endearing. "I'm just doing what anyone would do," he said, but Emma shook her head. "No, James, not anyone. Derek always said that helping others was a waste of time unless there was something in it for you. But you give so much of yourself without expecting anything in return. Why?" James set down the book he was holding and looked at her with an expression so tender it made her heart race. Because I grew up watching my father die slowly from heart disease, he said quietly. He spent his last years feeling useless, like he had nothing left to contribute to the world. I became a cardiologist to save hearts, but working with the foundation taught me that there are different kinds of hearts that need healing. The emotional ones, the spiritual ones, the dreams that people think are dead, but just need someone to believe in them again. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. Here was a man who had transformed his own pain into a mission to heal others, and somehow she had been lucky enough to cross his path. "James," she whispered, but he held up a gentle hand. "Let me finish, because I need you to know something. When I first saw you in that bookstore, it wasn't your appearance that caught my attention, though you're beautiful. It was the way you handled every customer like they were the most important person in the world. The way you lit up when someone asked for book recommendations. The way you treated every book like it was precious. I could see your heart from across the street, Emma, and it was the most beautiful heart I'd ever encountered." The air in the room shifted, charged with an electricity that Emma had never experienced with Derek. Where Derek's attention had always felt demanding and conditional, James's felt like a gift freely given. "I don't want to rush you," James continued, stepping closer to where Emma stood frozen among the scattered books. "I know you're just coming out of a difficult situation, and you need time to rediscover who you are outside of that relationship. But I want you to know that what Derek said to you, about never finding love again, about being out of someone's league, it's not just wrong, it's backwards. Any man would be lucky to earn your love, Emma. You're not reaching above your station by dreaming of more. You're finally reaching toward what you deserve." Emma felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified but exhilarated. For 2 years, Derek had made her feel like she was lucky he tolerated her presence, like she should be grateful for scraps of affection and approval. But James was looking at her like she was a treasure he couldn't quite believe was real. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if Derek was right? What if I'm not ready for this? Not good enough for someone like you?" James reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hands. "Emma," he said firmly, "you are not just good enough. You are extraordinary. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend however long it takes proving to you that the voice in your head that sounds like Derek is a liar. You deserve love that builds you up, that celebrates your dreams, that sees your potential, and helps you reach it. You deserve someone who thanks God every day for the privilege of knowing you." When James kissed her, soft and reverent, Emma felt something inside her chest crack open completely. This was what love was supposed to feel like coming home to yourself, like being seen and cherished for exactly who you are. As they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Emma realized that Derek's cruel words hadn't been a prophecy of her future loneliness. They had been the catalyst that led her directly to the love she'd never dared believe she deserved. 6 months later, Emma stood in the bathroom of her new apartment, a bright, airy space filled with bookshelves and plants that James had helped her pick out, staring at her reflection in disbelief. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the broken, diminished person Derek had left behind. Her eyes sparkled with confidence, her shoulders were straight with purpose, and her smile was genuine in a way it hadn't been for years. She was getting ready for the launch party of Heart Stories, the literary magazine she'd started with funding from the Literary Foundation and editorial guidance from James, who had connected her with publishing contacts through the hospital's professional network. The magazine's first issue featured stories of triumph over heartbreak, both literal and metaphorical, and had already received interest from major publishers who wanted to discuss distribution deals. Emma had found her calling in curating stories that helped people heal, that showed them they weren't alone in their struggles. "You were right," she'd told Mrs. Patterson the week before. "Books really can change lives. I just never thought mine would be one of them." Her relationship with James had deepened beyond anything she'd ever imagined possible. He didn't just support her dreams. He actively helped her achieve them, connecting her with resources and opportunities while being careful never to overshadow her accomplishments. "This is all you," he'd insisted when she worried that people would think she'd gotten her magazine deal through his connections. I just opened a few doors. You're the one with the talent and vision that impressed everyone. Tonight's launch party was being held at the community center where they'd first kissed among the scattered books, and Emma had invited everyone who had supported her journey. Mrs. Patterson, Maya and her family, the Literary Foundation Board, and the seniors from the reading program who had become like grandparents to her. But most importantly, James would be there, the man who had seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself. As Emma applied lipstick, a bold red that Derek had once called too attention-seeking, but that James said made her look like a woman who knew her own worth, her phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her blood ran cold as Derek's name appeared on her screen. He'd been trying to contact her for months, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading, but Emma had blocked his calls. Somehow, he'd gotten a new number. Saw the article about your little magazine in the paper, the text read. Don't get too comfortable with your success. That doctor of yours will get bored with you eventually, just like I did. When he leaves you for someone more sophisticated, don't come crying to me. You're still the same mediocre woman I married, just with better PR now. For a split second, Emma felt the old familiar stab of self-doubt. But then she looked around her beautiful apartment, at the framed copy of her magazine's first cover, at the photos of her and James volunteering together at literacy events, at the letter from a reader who said Emma's magazine had helped her find the courage to leave her own abusive marriage. Derek's words bounced off her like rain off a window. She had proof now, concrete, undeniable proof, that his assessment of her worth had been poison designed to keep her small and manageable. Emma deleted the message without responding and blocked the new number. Then she called James. Hey, beautiful, his warm voice filled her ear immediately. Are you ready for your big night? I'm so proud of you I can barely contain myself. The whole hospital is talking about the brilliant writer who's been featured in Publishers Weekly. James, Emma said, her voice steady and strong. I just want you to know that I love you. Not just for believing in me, but for helping me believe in myself. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this was possible. She paused, looking out her window toward the coffee shop where James still went every morning, now usually accompanied by Emma for breakfast dates that had become the favorite part of both their days. I used to think Derek's opinion of me was the truth. Now I know it was just his fear talking. Fear that I might realize I deserved better than what he was willing to give me. Emma, James's voice was thick with emotion. You didn't just deserve better. You deserved everything. Love that supports your dreams, partnership that makes you stronger, someone who sees your light instead of trying to dim it. And if I'm very lucky, you'll let me spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day. As Emma hung up the phone and grabbed her keys, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror one more time. The woman looking back at her was radiant with purpose, glowing with love, confident in her own worth. Derek had been wrong about everything, but especially about one thing. She hadn't just found love again. She'd found the kind of love that was deeper, truer, and more transformative than anything she'd experienced before. Before we continue with the incredible conclusion to Emma's story, I need to pause and share something with you. Stories like Emma's remind us that it's never too late to rewrite our lives, to walk away from people who diminish us and toward those who celebrate our potential. If Emma's journey is resonating with you, if you know someone who needs to hear that they deserve better, please share this story with them. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because we're building a community here of people who refuse to accept less than they deserve. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone try to convince you that your dreams were too big? How did you prove them wrong? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire the content I create. Now, let's finish Emma's incredible journey, because what happens at her magazine launch will take your breath away. The community center had been transformed into something magical. Fairy lights twinkled overhead. Tables displayed copies of Heart Stories surrounded by flowers, and the space buzzed with excited conversation as people flipped through the magazine's pages. Emma moved through the crowd like she was floating, accepting congratulations and watching readers discover stories that had moved her to tears during the editing process. The centerpiece of the evening was a display featuring letters from readers, dozens of them. sharing how the magazine had impacted their lives. This story about the woman who left her abusive marriage after 20 years gave me the courage to file for divorce. Read one letter aloud by Mrs. Patterson to a captivated audience. I kept it on my nightstand and reread it every time I felt weak. Now I'm 6 months into my new life, and for the first time in decades, I remember what happiness feels like. Emma felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she listened to similar testimonials. This was why she'd started the magazine, not for fame or money, but to create the lifeline she'd wished she'd had during her darkest moments with Derek. James found her during a quiet moment, slipping his arm around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple. "Look around, Emma," he whispered. "Look at all these people whose lives you've touched. This is just the beginning of the impact you're going to have." Emma leaned into his warmth, still marveling at how safe and cherished she felt in his embrace. "I never could have imagined this a year ago," she murmured. "I was so lost, so convinced that Derek's version of me was the only truth." "Can I tell you a secret?" James said, turning her to face him. The lights above them cast a warm glow over his features, and Emma saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. "What secret?" she asked, though part of her thought she already knew. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of her magazine launch party. The conversation around them gradually quieted as people realized what was happening. "Emma," James said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "A year ago, you thought you were too damaged for love, too ordinary for someone to choose you over all other possibilities. But I fell in love with your kindness, your passion, your incredible strength, and your beautiful heart that sees the best in everyone. You didn't just find love again. You found the love you were always meant to have. Will you marry me?" The room held its breath as Emma stared down at the man who had changed everything, not by rescuing her, but by believing in her until she could believe in herself. The ring in the box was perfect, a vintage setting that reminded her of the antique books she loved. But what took her breath away was the look in James's eyes. Pure love, unwavering certainty, and a future full of possibilities stretching out before them. "Yes," Emma whispered, then louder, "Yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Patterson was crying happy tears. Maya was taking pictures with shaking hands, and the seniors from the reading program were wiping their eyes and declaring it the most romantic thing they'd ever witnessed. But in that moment, surrounded by all the people who had supported her journey, Emma thought about Derek's cruel prediction. You'll never find love again. How spectacularly wrong he had been. She hadn't just found love. She'd found her soulmate, her biggest supporter, her partner in creating a life more beautiful than she'd ever dared dream. And the man he'd pointed to with such contempt, the one he'd declared out of her league, was now her fiancé, choosing her above all others. As the celebration continued around them, Emma and James slipped outside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the steps of the community center, looking across the street at the coffee shop where their story had really begun. "I have something to confess," Emma said, laughing through happy tears. "That first day you came into the bookstore, when Mrs. Patterson introduced us, I was terrified you'd think Derek was right, that I really was reaching for something beyond what I deserved." James cupped her face in his hands, the same gesture he'd made the night he first kissed her. "Emma, my love, you never reached beyond what you deserved. You reached toward what was always meant to be yours. The only tragedy would have been if you'd listened to Derek's voice instead of your own heart." He kissed her forehead gently. "Promise me something. If you ever start to doubt yourself again, if you ever hear his voice in your head telling you you're not enough, you'll remember this night. You'll remember how many lives you've touched, how many people love and believe in you, how perfectly we fit together." "I promise," Emma said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. As they walked back inside to rejoin their celebration, Emma caught a glimpse of herself in the glass door, radiant, confident, surrounded by love and possibility. The woman Derek had tried to break was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more powerful than she'd ever been in his shadow. Emma could hear Derek's sharp intake of breath at her words, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. "You sound different," he said quietly. "Stronger. I always told myself that I was protecting you from disappointment, that I was being realistic about your limitations. But I see now that I was just afraid of your potential, afraid that if you succeeded, it would expose how small I really was." Emma felt James enter the kitchen behind her, his presence immediately calming even before he wrapped his arms gently around her waist from behind, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "Derek, I forgive you," Emma said, and she meant it completely. "Not because what you did was acceptable, but because holding on to that pain was keeping me from fully embracing the life I was meant to have. You were wrong about everything, about my capabilities, about what I deserved, about James being out of my league. But your cruelty, as much as I wish it had never happened, taught me something invaluable about my own resilience." She paused, watching through the kitchen window as Maya's children played in the backyard, their laughter floating through the glass. "I learned that my worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. I learned that love isn't about making yourself smaller to fit someone's limited vision of who you should be." Derek was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I heard about your book, about how you've helped other people tell their stories. I've been going to therapy, trying to understand why I was so cruel to you. My therapist says I was projecting my own insecurities, that I was so afraid of being abandoned that I tried to convince you that you couldn't do better than me. It's no excuse, but I need you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, not from old pain, but from compassion for the broken person Derek had been, and apparently still was in some ways. James tightened his arms around her, and she could feel his steady heartbeat against her back, reminding her of how far she'd traveled from those dark days when Derek's words had felt like absolute truth. "Derek," she said gently, "I hope you find peace. I hope you learn to see your own worth without diminishing others. But this conversation feels like closure for something that was already closed for me. I've built a life filled with people who celebrate my successes, who encourage my dreams, who love me not in spite of who I am, but because of who I am." She could hear voices in the background of Derek's call, perhaps a wife, perhaps children, and she found herself hoping that he had learned to love them better than he had loved her. "I should go," Derek said finally. "Emma, I just want you to know that I was wrong about everything. You found love that was worthy of you. You built something incredible with your life, and I'm genuinely happy that you proved me so completely wrong." Emma smiled, feeling the last tiny knot of old hurt dissolve completely. "Thank you, Derek. Take care of yourself." After she hung up, Emma turned in James's arms and looked up into his concerned face. "Are you okay?" he asked, searching her eyes for any sign of distress. Emma rose up on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, pouring all her love and gratitude into that simple gesture. "I'm more than okay," she said. "That conversation just reminded me how grateful I am for this life we've built together, for the way you've loved me from the very first day we met." James smiled and spun her around the kitchen, making her laugh with pure joy. "Mrs. Patterson is going to think we've lost our minds," Emma said. But she didn't care. "Let her," James said, setting her down but keeping her close. "Let everyone know that we're disgustingly happy." From the dining room, they could hear Maya calling out that dinner was getting cold, and Mrs. Patterson was telling the children to wash their hands, and life was calling them back to its beautiful, ordinary rhythms. As they walked hand in hand toward their chosen family, Emma reflected on how Derek's prediction had been the opposite of prophetic. She hadn't just found love again, she had discovered what love actually looked like when it was real, supportive, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. The man Derek had claimed was out of her league had become her perfect match, not because he had lowered his standards, but because he had recognized in her what she had always possessed but had been taught to doubt. Tonight, surrounded by laughter and warmth, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she had not only proved Derek wrong, She had exceeded even her own wildest dreams of what her life could become.